So let's begin. This will be our newest roundtable for December. We're talking about our November issue. Came out last month, issue number 11. And I have two guests joining myself and Chris Vogt. First up, Anna Genevieve Wenham. Would you mind giving us kind of a quick intro? Who are you?
Cool. I'm Anna. I'm a writer and a reader, and I think I've always been those things, but in the past couple of years have really started to focus on it and have been published in a few different places, including Wildlife Journal. And I now am the editor-in-chief of another journal, Passengers Journal. And I'm here to talk about poetry and art because I love those things.
Sounds good. Yeah. And issue number 5, Wildlife Journal. You had a poem in that issue, going back to that one. So yeah, thanks for being here. And we have Vian Borchert. So what's your intro?
So I'm an artist, visual artist, and I've been doing art for many years, decades. I've been doing it ever since I was a child. I'm a Corcoran GW notable alumni, and I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area. I also teach. I've been teaching for over a decade, adults, fine art classes in painting and drawing. And I'm a professional artist. I exhibit in New York City, and I actually have a solo show starting tomorrow in Washington, D.C. area. It's called Dreamscapes. So you can go to my website, which is my name, vianborchert.com, and see more of my artwork. So my work is more, I define it as visual poetry. And the work is abstracted seascapes and landscapes. So my take on nature, but more with my vision, with more like a modern contemporary take, with my aesthetics and abstraction. So yeah, look it up. And I love art and I love literature, and I feel that they definitely combine together and go very well together. And I'm happy to be here today.
And your piece, Ghost Town, I got that right. Ghost Town was in issue 9. So two former contributors. So it's nice to. It's always good to have people in the community, in the wildlife community, circle back around every now and again and join us. Yeah, why don't we get into it? So me and Chris talked just for a minute before we started recording, and the one we mentioned first off was Jerrica Taylor's Wisteria Witness. So Anna, that was one of your selections.
Sure. Well, I guess first off, the thing that struck me the most was kind of like a pet interest of mine, which is just this tension between what you can express and what you can't express, what you leave absent by mentioning it, what is present by not mentioning it. And I think that this piece really did an amazing job at kind of pulling both sides of that tension between characters that were kind of like half present, they were mentioned, but they were never explored. And then this creature that's not a character, but it's still the center of the piece, that gets a couple of half descriptions, like they're very evocative. What's the line? The shiny leaf type skin that doesn't really exist, but that's the way that it exists. I found that whole kind of line super interesting and intriguing for kind of making me want to read more. And then having kind of the story of the actual plot, the actual events being woven through that just kind of drew me into the world of the piece. So that's one reason why I love that piece.
Yeah, that line, I got it here, I believe. The sky the glossy shine of its skin appears as leaves caressed by moonlight. Arms like branches go out and up. maybe it came every night hidden under what I cleared away. But yeah, nice. I like that description of what's mentioned and what's called, what's called out by not being mentioned.
Mhm.
Did anybody have a kind of a pretty obvious feeling associated with clearly something's being spotlighted, but we're also not getting to see the thing that has the flashlight beam shine on it? Did
Mhm.
that evoke a specific feeling for anybody? Because I got a little dread. I got a little
Yeah.
bit of an Edgar Allan Poe feeling of the thing that's lurking and kind of reaching, and it's
Right.
very graspy and viney, and wasn't sure where to go from there.
And it
Yeah,
made me want to kind of turn around and watch my back.
Right.
Yeah, I thought these are my thoughts. I really liked it too. I think it was my favorite piece of literature in the whole issue, and I do think that from just the first introduction lines, it really grabbed me, and it wanted me to continue reading it. And I thought the writing was very well, and also the transitioning within the writing was very well too. And I'll tell you my take of how I felt. So I like the word when she said, when she described the wisteria tree, that it's ambitiously going for the roof. And then the fact that she got tangled themselves around my wrists. Okay, so that was very interesting for me. Arms like branches go out and about, which I think interesting use of personification, that the wisteria tree becomes almost a person grabbing her or tangling or trying to tell her something. Hey, come on, get out of here, or something like that. And then I like the fact that she said, I study it in several breaths. I thought that was very interesting. And then it's kind of there's a bit of a sadness and melancholy to the whole piece, which grabbed me also. The fact that she said that she's monotone of washing dishes and folding laundry. That was kind of an interesting take there. Again, the wisteria tree really is obviously the star here. The wisteria begins to bloom more widely, and she kind of repeats the word widely throughout. And then she goes back to her life, suffocating. And then when she says she kind of like fled in the middle of the night, took a small suitcase, pulled behind me. So here I would think that it seems to me that the wild wisteria tree, kind of like inspired her to run away from her monotone life. And I think overall, I like her description of the wisteria tree's freedom and the wild nature of the tree. But also, I thought you were talking about Edgar Allan Poe. There's definitely that morbid or kind of somber the tone throughout the story. I personally thought that it's very similar to Virginia Woolf's writing. Mm-hmm. So where it's, Virginia Woolf talks about the confined women who want to break free, and the women who in her story, she calls upon these women for the pursuit of liberty, right? So that's something that I thought is kind of like, I don't know, maybe she's probably very much influenced by Virginia Woolf. And it reminded me of a story that I read a long time ago, and I'm not sure if I'm recalling it correctly, but it's about a woman who lived very much of a timid woman, huh? So she lived in a very confined, timid kind of lifestyle, like with her shadow. But her shadow was like almost wild. I kind of didn't like her character. Shadow didn't like the character of the woman. So the shadow eventually eats up the woman. And in a way, it's kind of
thinking of the yellow wallpaper?
I don't know exactly the name of it. I can't remember the name, but I may be using too much my imagination because it's such a long time. Like the shadow ate up the woman. Like, you really need to get out of your skin, almost, woman. And I think that's kind of like, I feel, the message behind this piece, where it really kind of, you have to become a little bit stronger. You have to kind of get out of your skin to have a life. I know this sounds really bad to say, but anyway, that's how I feel about this piece. That this wisteria tree that is full of beauty and just growing and blossoming, kind of telling this timid woman, maybe you should do more than washing dishes, pruning, landscaping, making sure everything looks manicured and pedicured and beautiful. Maybe you should do more wild things. Maybe you should just go out, go on a trip. And I think that's kind of like maybe nature's trying to tell us something here. That kind of thing. And I do think that in nature, if we look very carefully, we will find a lot of wonderful solutions. Maybe in our life that we perhaps imprison ourselves within. So I do think that. So one can really find a lot of analogy within this piece, a lot of similarities, perhaps to older literature. But I think that the message here is pretty clear, kind of like the idea of break out. So that's what I felt.
I didn't know if you had if Anna or maybe Chris, you had a take on the ending or the last couple of sentences, because that's what drew me in. When you get kind of, for me, that kind of gave me the best insight, maybe. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it gave me an insight into the speaker. And the last sentence is, "This time, I am the one who wishes to be unseen, my flight unacknowledged. It does me the same kindness of pretending we never passed in the night." So that was kind of just a curious thing. It kind of drew me into that character, the speaker, to wanting to withdraw.
Yeah.
And is that a positive, I guess,
right.
desire, or is that a negative? I guess we could take on that. But so Anna, did you have a take on that?
So I didn't think it was, I thought there was a lot of tension basically at every point throughout the piece. And one thing I was thinking about in the central metaphor of like cutting back the wisteria being the thing that, allows it to blossom and bloom. And then also the wisteria is still a domesticated plant in this case. Like, it's so beautiful. It's been hacked away by her, but it's still domestic. It's still, kind of stuck there. And then it's really the interaction that she has with this creature that is kind of full of ambiguity. And it was almost like a violation for both her and the creature when she saw it. And so they did this pretending not to have seen, but then it's in the piece, it's been written about, so we all know about it, it feels, like a second violation. And so I think those last lines really bring that tension to the fore, because how can you pretend that you haven't seen, that it hasn't seen you, that this kind of recognition hasn't happened, when you're now telling this whole audience about it. So I think there's something like tricksterish about this voice.
It could be. I that's wonderful analysis of it, and I could be like, is she jealous? Is she jealous from the tree? Looks like she is. The way she was describing this tree, personifying the tree too. I do think. I mean, it's interesting because there's so much there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of psychology there. Let's just put it this way. So there's a lot of psychoanalysis in this piece as well, not only just like literature analysis. So I do think there's a lot of layers, right? It's a lot of layers, a lot of deep layers that seem to be, but it's very effective.
Yeah, when I first did my first run through, I had that initial it felt like a setup for kind of a traditional horror story. And of course, if you crossbreed Edgar Allan Poe with sort of the feminine fire, the feminine mystique, you get Charlotte Perkins Gilman. And the Yellow Wallpaper is all about this idea of the tendrils coming out of the wallpaper that is the thing that is simultaneously her mirror and her shadow. So if you add Virginia Woolf into the mix, you get a whole genre, this whole genre of the feminine trapped in a self-contained situation where nature might be the wild force that helps kind of pull someone out of a situation like that.
I like the idea of creating that genre. I think that's I wouldn't have never put that, would have never quite put that together like that. So that's another illustration why we do these conversations, because that intersection is pretty cool. I got my own little reveal. If you're interested. Jerica was kind enough to send me her explanation, her behind the scenes of writing this piece, so I could share that with you.
That would be.
Before you tell us, does she reveal what the thing is, the creature? Because the science fiction nerd was, I want to know what it is. Is it a snake? Maybe it's a Garden of Eden thing going on. Right. But then, of course, you shouldn't know what it is if it's a reflection.
I guess we'll save, right? If you want to keep the mystery, like fast forward about a minute and a half. So
Spoiler alert, good to know.
So this is Jerica's words. Some talented gardener planted wisteria along the side of my house before I moved there, and it was years before I understood what it was or how I was meant to care for it. As the wisteria grew, it was supposed to be trained and twisted along the posts and a small fence. In my good-natured negligence, the wisteria grew on its own path, twisting up the railings of the deck, up the crabapple tree branches, in and around itself in wide loops. I now fight a losing battle against trimming it back every season, and I feel as though it has a mind of its own, and a cunning, determined one at that. It's a little bit of trickster quality, maybe. But oh, the flowers are gorgeous. They're delicate waterfalls of purple. The bees and hummingbirds love them, and they're worth the seasonal overgrowth battle. She goes on, I started this piece after a weekend of pruning when I'd cut back enough to actually change the way the light came through the part of the yard. I've learned to be ruthless with the weeds and cutting back invasives, but it's more difficult to trim plants I like, even if I know it's both necessary and beneficial. There's that kind of tension, right? You don't want to, I kind of felt that at times too. You don't want to cut too much of the thing that you want more of. She continues, it was that strange sort of guilt that came with me when I sat down to write, a worry that I'd taken something from the yard, from the wisteria that I didn't understand and might even be beyond my comprehension. It was easy to imagine the wisteria a creature, or home of a creature, one who possibly was going about their life as I was. I love imagery when the speculative sits right in the middle of the ordinary, like a neighbor. That was the image that pulled the piece together for me. Two neighbors minding their own business. So we don't get too much of a spoiler, but kind of more of an imaginary creature, just to kind of say there's something in there, kind of doing what I'm doing on this side, doing that thing on that side.
I think that, as I always say, blame it on the gardener.
I was going to say, I kind of professionally, I feel duty bound to read directly from the bio and mention that Jerica is a non-binary, neurodivergent queer cook birder and chicken herder. And I'm retrospectively thinking of all the feminine I was imposing. And that description that you just gave makes me step out of that a little bit to what extent possible and realize there's a lot of potential that I might miss if I deliberately look at the author's gender and then start making assumptions. And that's good. That's a good little wake up. It's a good little, oh, okay. Yeah, I see I was superimposing a whole bunch of data on Jerica's piece because immediately I was thinking either squelched daughter or imprisoned housewife. And that's good. Good to kind of just wake up and like, oh, I was looking down the wrong way.
I mean, just not to go back to the tension too many times, but yeah, that's the kind of the tension of, the thing you're trying to control versus the thing doing what it's going to do. So yeah, the wisteria kind of functions as this piece of nature encroaching on, this domestic life, this yard, this house, the fence, which of course it is part of that domestic life, but it's also has, its own, not quite its own mind, but it has its own, behavior.
And it must be said, I'm an incurable, authorial reader. I can't help it. I know that the author is dead, and I shouldn't be, but I can't help but look at an author or any hints the author wants to give you, or you might find out about the author's life and revisit the piece.
Yeah.
And I think in this case, that was kind of a nice little perspective jump for me, little electric jolt.
Yeah. Well, in our world, the author's not dead. They're on Instagram. I emailed yesterday. So yeah, I mean, that's part of our process. We kind of go through when possible. Yeah, we do like to bring the author in to have their say, so we don't get too far afield. And when we get carried away, as it happens sometimes with their own interpretation. So get grounded a little bit. So yeah, that's a great piece, Wisteria Witness.
Very good piece.
We'll keep the foliage theme going, and we'll shift to the Bonnie Matthews Brock's Red Leaves picture. That was our cover image for issue 11 in November. So if you've seen the issue, you would have seen that image. So yeah, why did you select that one?
I actually did make a print out of it. I don't know if you guys can see it. That's helpful, right? Like this, okay?
Yep.
So look at it. This really looks pretty good, right? It's a very nice image. No wonder you picked it for the cover image. I mean, it's very, very. It really spoke to me, and I think it's very well done, and it has also a lot of beauty to it as well. What I like about it is, in a way, it's a photograph. Okay, I'm a painter. But I do appreciate all forms of art, and I've taken photography, so I know a lot of things that the photographers go through. But with this one, what I liked about it, so it's rather than, let's say, having a regular photograph, just like a snapshot of something that you see from life. Basically, photography is like freezing something that you see in life and putting in an image, finger, So it's technology too, right? Photography. With this one, I felt that the photographer went a little bit beyond just like a regular photo, and kind of wanted to make it look a little bit more. It veers more towards fine art or more a visual artistry to it. So I think that's why I picked it. I felt that it went beyond the obvious regular photo or just a well done photo, and it kind of gave you this feel of mistiness, mysteriousness, but also very limited color palette, which makes it more effective, by the way, in this case. So the feelings that I got out of it is like as if, let's say, you're waking up from a nap and you're looking outside of the window and there's some trees and maybe your eyes are still kind of blurry from the nap and you're looking out and things look blurry. So that's what I liked about it. It's like that kind of look of your inside looking outside. So I thought that perspective, the angle perspective is very good. So in a way, by the photographer doing that, I don't know if she took it. I'm thinking she was inside looking outside. And I think usually that perspective is very interesting for me in general. And even in art, when you're like Matisse, for example. Matisse did a lot of paintings where he's inside of his apartment looking outside to the French Riviera, painting what he saw. So, but it's always nice to select the inside-outside kind of perspective and look. What I also liked about it, again, kind of goes back to that, how we see it. It looks like this mistiness, this blurriness, looks like also you can be looking from behind the curtain, like a white stash curtain, okay? So things are not really clear. And I think that adds more to the beauty of the mysteriousness and the beauty and the simplicity of this piece, and making it very soft and visually pleasing to look at. The limited color palette, the fact that it's a tree, again, going back to trees. So, and a beautiful tree that you can, the color is really nice too. It has embodies a little bit of more of that autumn kind of like reddish tones. So kind of falls nicely within fall. Yeah, overall, I think it's very well done. So I can see where it grabbed you when you said, okay, I think this really should be on the cover. So yeah, I really like it. It just gives a very nice feel. And one can, again, use their imagination as well. That it's behind something, or again, maybe it's underwater, or maybe it's behind a window that's been rained on a lot. That's a good possibility as well. So things are losing crispness and clarity. So it's more like you see fuzziness or you see more of a blur. And usually that's a beautiful look also for photography. I've noticed a lot of photographers do try to capture things behind, let's say, like within the rain or behind windows that are full of rain. So you'll end up with a very crystallized kind of look. So technique-wise, it's very good. And overall, I think it's just a very effective work of art.
Thanks.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, Erin, but I think you and I can both relate to the subjective feeling of looking through a window, a pane of glass with rain coming down, just in reference to the refractory quality. And also, if you imagine that scene in a movie, you're kind of combining what it literally looks like. And of course, anytime a scene like that happens in a movie where somebody's staring through a pane of glass with rain coming down, there's this combination of sadness, but also complexity and the obscuring of reality. So I love that idea that that could be one very literal thing that also has this refractory quality that works
Yeah.
psychologically as well as visually.
Yeah, and I love that it didn't occur to me, believe it or not, being inside looking out with this image didn't occur to me. So yeah, it makes perfect sense, and I really love the curtain idea, or kind of the veil, almost like it is kind of a, when you get that little bit of distortion, blurring, and it was just for me, just such a familiar image, in the sense that uh, I've made these types of images. Like this is kind of what it's just such like a part of like what I'm interested in. It's almost like too close, for me to even maybe talk about too much, because it's just such a natural fit for like what I'm interested in. So, like having said that, I'm kind of have a high degree of bias with this piece. I'm just in favor of it from the kind of just everything you said. Just the kind of distorted view of a familiar, thing, tree, losing its leaves, but it's done in such kind of that twisted kind of way that it just immediately for me just appealing, and turns out comes around uh, for our November issue, right? So it wouldn't quite, probably wouldn't be the best cover for June, July, but for as we kind of hit on the seasonal themes, as we do, that's what that's what tends to happen, oddly enough. So yeah, love that. And any other thoughts? We did a bunch already. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, I have just one little thing, which is that I think a little bit of what you were saying is it's like the familiar in an unfamiliar telling. And I think what was really powerful for me was, not to hop on the tension, but the contrasts in the different sections, where there are some areas where it's kind of like clear to see, and then other areas where it's obscured, and it kind of alternates. And I think as your eye goes across, you're almost like forced to shift perspective a few different times, even though what you're seeing is something that you're not quite sure how to understand it. And that kind of like unsettling viewing experience of something familiar is fun and a little bit creepy, in an autumnal kind of way.
I did contact Bonnie. She was kind enough to respond in short notice. So it was not quite an inside looking out in a literal sense, but kind of an odd connection. She said she shot this photo at the entrance to a trail to the Stone Fort Boulders field in Soddy Daisy, Tennessee, near Chattanooga. So a little bit of an inside, or looking in an entrance, approaching the trail. She said, "I love visiting boulder fields and love photographing in nature, and the boulderers and climbers too." She has another image in this issue. That one was shot actually at Yosemite Park, but she said in both cases, in both of her images that appear in the issue, some time alone while my husband was rock climbing. Often I want to return a second and sometimes even a third time to a place I've photographed. This time on my own gives me the opportunity to photograph something I wished I'd shot somehow differently or under different conditions, and or to include more or less context within the image. And when I'm on my own, I can take as long as I want to take as many shots of the same thing as I want without impacting the experience of anyone else. Which, yeah, if anybody's been maybe hiking with a camera, you can maybe have that experience when the other person doesn't have a camera or anything else to do other than keep on walking. So yeah, so that was kind of that sense of revisiting a place, and then the experimentation was there too, kind of testing this way, that way. And she doesn't mention kind of overlaying multiple images to get this finished piece. I'm guessing it appears that's something that's going on also, but that's not from Bonnie's words. That's just kind of my impression. It just kind of appears that way. I don't know if it's actually multiple images or just has the appearance of that, but yeah, I think that's a nice summary of that one. So thanks. We want to move to Christine Weaver, her poem Witch Dance. And back to Anna, that was one of your selections.
So there are a lot of things that I like about this poem, but one of them is that when it started, I didn't really know where it was going. And there were several points throughout the poem where I kind of thought that I had a grasp on where it was going. I guess there was maybe like 3/4 of the way through, I was like, okay, I'm right about where this is going, and then got to have the fun experience of almost like watching it play out, and being what I thought it would be. Almost the way that once you learn a song, like you know how to dance to it, like you know what's coming next, you can anticipate it, and that's the kind of enjoyable thing about it, is that you feel like you know it. I think that this piece also had, once again, the pet interest of mine, the tension between what's expressible and what's ineffable, where the poem is getting at this thing that perhaps we all share, but we know it, we don't know it, it's latent, it's not latent. There's that same kind of push and pull throughout the whole poem, even though I think in the end it kind of lands on one conclusion, which is almost like, when you dance, that's when you're feeling or being this life force, energy, eternal, same thing that we've all had throughout the universe. But it was cool throughout the poem to kind of feel like that's the conclusion we were etching towards.
Let me just ask if any of us here, have you ever participated in a drum circle?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the reason I thought of that is that's the kind of thing you said, ineffable versus what the kind of fever dream you want to tell somebody about after you're out of it, and it's impossible once you've potentially done something on a hallucinogenic scale. And so I was a late comer to that kind of experience. I was very suspicious of anything. Well, that's the music of the spheres, and it's a celestial dance, and part of your DNA and genetic legacy is participating in this dance that we're all in together. And I was very poo-poo about that. And then I have to say that I was in a drum circle, and the circumstances were such that I kind of lost myself, was pulled directly out of any individual experience. And so the poem was interesting because initially I kind of had that sense of familiarity, maybe even a little nostalgia in some of the imagery. I said, well, okay, here comes an interesting environmental poem. That was my first thought. This looks good. And then as I kind of felt drawn into the waltz of the way the language set up, but also the actual description of this kind of anthropological look at dancing, and we're sitting around the bonfire together, and we're participating in some really long-term, I was going to say human experience, but that's also a bias. Let's say natural or conscious or existence experience. And I kind of gradually started zooming out more and more, and the poem got better and better the more I zoomed out. I really did appreciate that, and I got some of that imagery that you were describing very nicely. So I think it worked on that level for sure.
So this is my analysis of the poem. I really like the poem, and as Chris was saying, the more you zoom out, or the more you look at it, the more you appreciate this poem, and you see so much in this poem as well. And also, as Anna was saying, there's like this almost the pull and push, and that you also attracted you to the other piece, and also it has a bit of that eeriness to it as well. So it's not all like joyful; it has a bit of that. What's going on here? So the first thing about the poem that I thought was very, very interesting is the title, Witch Dance ? Okay. And we'll get back to that later. Because I was like, as I was reading it, I kind of went back to it, and I'm like, I'm trying to think that is this poet trying to tell us something between the lines more than what meets the eye? So I think with both of these, actually, interestingly, Anna, you picked both because there's much more than what meets the eye. There's a lot of hidden. I feel like there's a lot of hidden layers. This one as well. So what I liked about it is overall, I felt that it's a very convivial, survival, kind of an upbeat tone to the whole thing, but there's definitely a very ceremonial, almost tribal kind of community take on this poem. The lines that I liked where we stray outside of memory. I thought that was a really nice line. And then she asked, what is that keeps us moving? So she's kind of like making us ponder what's going on here. Let's look at this big picture here. What is keeping us moving as human beings? And then she basically says, and I think this is, I don't know, I'm thinking this is like a current poem, like a return to when Earth carried us not as Scrooge, not as disease, not as weighed, unmet, need, grasping, starving. I thought these are the best lines of the poem, but as delight. So I kind of like her upbeat take on like, okay, fine, we live in a pandemic, in a diseased world, but let's kind of delight. Let's have a little bit of delight. So kind of reclaiming the delight and over mankind, had the power of being delightful. So I thought it was a bit of a celebration of mankind. And then she said, we're hunter-gatherers across continents singing sacred lines. Very interesting. And then she said, again, very interesting, dance, shaking bodies, alive feet. And then she, within the singing, she says, step, clap, pray for survival. So I thought that the dance song, number one, I like the fact that there's music to it, but also a sense of movement. Now we feel a little bit. We feel people dancing almost in a tribal way. They're clapping, they're happy, they're communal. So the dance song kind of embodied a sense of movement, of celebration, of people coming together and celebrating. So I felt that this is kind of like a ritual dance. Like in the past, they would do dance together to avert diseases, evils. So a lot of dance happened in the past to also kind of take, bad spirits and evil spirits away from us. We dance in a communal way. I thought in general, it's a very, very good poem. Now it goes back to kind of a circle back to the title, witch dance, which kind of makes me think about two things. Witch dance, the dances of witches, or wish, like wishing upon a star kind of dance.
I was going to say I'm going to start talking because I don't want this to sound like a point because I don't know where I'm going to land with it necessarily. But in terms of thinking the two kinds of dance, I'm used to associating dancing generally with something that's very positive. So it's celebratory. It can have this tribal element. It also can be kind of religious, like the whirling dervishes and things like that. So I almost always assume dance by itself is good. So giving me the choice of which dance, and it seems like the simple version of the choice is the natural dance where we're connected with nature and the earth is happy to have us as a copacetic, happy relationship versus the exploitive dance where we're maybe more like in a zombie state. The key line that maybe sent me in this direction had to do with lines pulsing freeways. The idea of thinking of cars on a freeway as maybe veins in a bloodstream, and that just kind of happens by itself. But in autopilot, that kind of dance that is only habitual, is only nostalgic, but only in the most superficial way that's kind of non-reflexive. That's the kind of dance that can lead you to using up all the resources or being the drunk guy who wants to hear the same song at the bar and he just plays the same Journey song again. He's kind of stuck in that one dance and he's unable to break out of it. So I wondered which dance was kind of getting at there's this potential for celebration and renewal and rebirth, but there's also this idea of getting trapped in a cycle. And if there isn't a better definition for addiction than getting trapped in the same familiar yet comforting dance, I don't know what a better definition could be for that. So maybe part of the question is which of those two things you want to get kind of caught up in.
And I think that's the thing, that the fact that it is a question rather than just telling us just a title, like it could be the dance. No, it's giving us more of a question mark is in a way an act by itself of engaging the reader. And I think the way she was also writing, it sounds like she's also a celebratory of communal and engaging people to be together. So I like the fact that she also engages the reader by that kind of like asking that question. And again, what is that keeps us moving? Question mark. So she's again trying to trigger, we're thinking, yeah, that's, reasons to survive and to be on this earth and, to be together and that kind of thing. But it's really is effective. It's very, very good. I like it very much. I think it's definitely beautiful.
Right. Yeah. And it is something to be said to have that kind of movement element. I mean, as far as, physical movement, kinesthetic movement in a written piece. That's pretty unique. I do have, or I'll say this: our contributors have really come through for us, and there's even more to come after this. But believe it or not, Christine was able to send me a little bit of behind the scenes. So thank you to our contributors who responded to me in short notice. But she made the comment that this piece was written in response to a prompt. The prompt was, if you made a prayer for a place or creature, what would it be? And what she chose was polar bear, which is kind of the initial image. And kind of as we mentioned, it kind of starts maybe with kind of an expected kind of environmental image and then kind of zooms out and zooms back in time from there. So that her starting point is polar bear, and just kind of with the imagery of Arctic sea melting, polar bears being unmoored, their future is threatened. Christine continues, humans haven't always had to live in these spaces and lifeways of gut-wrenching contradictions, harm, and separation. We have not always had to apologize to Mother Nature while moving through our days between birth and death. As we are now in what some call the great unraveling, we can let go of what doesn't serve us or the beings we share this planet with. She says, as an editor in an anthropology publication, I've carried with me stories about healing and sustainable lifeways of contemporary hunter-gatherers. Kind of comments on this is who we all were. We all used to be hunter-gatherers prior to around 12,000 years ago. That's kind of hardwired into who we are, and that's I'm sympathetic to that viewpoint because I think about that a lot myself. So it's kind of drawn into this piece with that take. So she mentions a couple in particular, and an author, a writer who I hadn't thought of in a while, but I was familiar with. Who she mentions is Wade Davis, being an inspiration, anthropologist Wade Davis. Good reminder to me, like, oh, look up Wade Davis again, because he's a pretty fascinating guy. And she did send a couple of links in addition for actual dances of these hunter-gatherers from different tribes in Southern Africa. And then comments at the very end, all hands are on deck. We need this now from each of us. Which dance? Bringing forth our medicine, or continue on a path of devastation, harm, extinction? So it is that kind of question that ends with a question mark. And even in her explanation and behind the scenes summary, she has that question embedded in there as well. So clearly there's kind of those options available to us as an individual, as a species, probably more importantly. So yeah, I think that's a little bit of insight, and I think it kind of followed the reading of the poem to kind of give us that perspective of individual to a larger, community, larger embodiment of the planet, I guess, ultimately.
The message is pretty good. It's coming together to better our community, maybe finding a cure or just like praying for better things also, and having positive energy too. I think that also contributes, right, in the betterment.
I don't know. I think there's a little, as always, tension in the middle of that though, because she also, she says she ends on our rattles our own, which is a little, I've got my rattle, you've got yours. And that line earlier about but as delight, as bones that danced close in, well, I think you can't help but associate bones with death, which is the opposite of survival. So I think even in this like celebratory, even in a circle, right? Like a circle is a closed system. Someone's outside the circle, like you can't get into a circle. So I think there's a even in the survival, there's loss and exclusion, and it's not all rainbows and sunshine. You know, it's I think still hard, and it's almost like in the witch dance question, like okay, well, who's going to be included in this dance? Who knows the dance? Yeah, I think I guess I have a slightly different interpretation, which
No,
is
I think that's important to kind of keep that balance there because yeah, it is in the poem, and I think it is in the author's mindset. Yeah, there is that element of the other side, right? Yeah.
yeah, like I mean, I do
up.
think there's that coming together pull, but then there's also a question of like who, how.
This is probably me. I'm sure this is me projecting, but I like that point because the idea part of the sadness is as a human individual you want memory because you want to stay alive and be alive. But what's the line? We stray into a precision of memory, and maybe the precision of memory is the clinging to a certain kind of life or clinging to life generally. And yeah, the part of the more somber half of the poem is that you may have to make some choices about what you want to preserve and kind of where that dance takes you. And as an individual who wants to live, I'm like, yes, dance, clap, drums are excellent, but there also might be this notion that there's these larger spheres in which we have to kind of put our own egos aside.
Right. I think you're right. I mean, I think that's one of the lines that I like. We stray outside of memory. So it could be a question of like, are we going to repeat history? Are we going to keep on doing the same mistakes over and over again? You know, it's like, there is definitely that like, hey, I'm giving you a bunch of questions here. It's like almost quizzing us. Do you know what the right thing to do? But yeah, definitely it has the death connotations or ideas in it, within it. And I don't know if she wants to tell us, hey, there is good and evil. What do you choose? What do you choose? What do you lean more towards? So it seems like, yeah, definitely it seems like there's a little bit of like quizzing happening here.
Yeah. Well, it just occurred to me too that like, I mean, on the personal level, you don't want to be the branch of Osteria that gets pruned off. You don't want to be that branch. But it has to happen, for the better, for the survival of the larger whole. I think this is a good place to wrap up our summary of the issue 11. We had 3 great pieces, as it turns out. Jerica Taylor, Wisteria Witness, Bonnie Matthews Brock, Red Leaves, Christine Weaver, Witch Dance. So I'll say thank you to Anna, thank you to Vian, thanks Chris once again, and we'll stick around for a moment, so don't leave us yet, but we'll pause here, and again, thanks for joining us. Great time, great conversation, thanks for your thoughts. We'll talk to you again later.